common method of access is via the console cable. This is the pale blue cable that you get with a firewall. Initially I'm going to use putty, select serial. Now, the default settings will be sufficient to get you on, but if you wanted to change them you could just click the serial on the bottom there. So ensure you've got serial connected and simply hit open. Hit return a couple of times and that's us connected to the firewall at command line. And disconnect. To do the same thing via hyperterminal, I still prefer to use hyperterminal. Fire it up and give your connection a sensible name. Click OK. Change connect using to the COM port that you're going to be using. Change bits per second to 9600, 8, none, 1, none. Apply OK. And again hit return a couple of times. And once again that's us connected via the serial cable or the rollover cable to the firewall. This method requires physical access and it's the most common method of access in the firewall. Now for your day-to-day administration, you'll notice here I'm connected via the network cable. Providing it's been enabled, you can access the ASTM console of the firewall via its IP address. It's on HTTPS, simply browse to it with a supported browser. Because it's got a self-signed certificate, it'll moan about certificates. Now you can run the Java applet simply by clicking Run ASTM, and providing you've got Java installed. Yes, I always trust. Now here you will more often than not leave the username blank and enter the enable password unless you've set up AAA authentication. And there's my ASTM launched for me to manage my firewall. Now, in addition to the Java applet ASTM, you can run or install and run the full ASTM client. You get it in exactly the same way by browsing to the firewall's IP address on HTTPS. Continue to this website, but this time click Install ASTM Launcher. Again, supply the enable password, and you will be given the option to either run or save the installer. I'm just going to run it directly from the firewall. Simply accept all the defaults. And click Finish. And after a couple of seconds the ASTM will launch, and once again give it the enable password to access the ASTM. And that's the same using the full ASTM client software. You'll notice it puts a shortcut on the desktop as well. Let's just exit out of that. Now to use the ASTM, as I said earlier, it has to be enabled. So I'm just going in here via a serial connection, and there you can see the command to turn it on is HTTP server enable. If I wanted to disable the ASTM, I would simply prefix that with a no, and it will be no HTTP server enable. You can change the port. For example, if you've only got one outside IP and you want to port forward HTTPS, you can change the port. There I've changed it to port 2456, and then you would access it via HTTP, its IP address :2456. I'm just going to put it back on its default. Now, simply enabling it is not enough. You need to grant access to it, and to do that, it's HTTP. Then here I'm granting access to one IP address, which is my laptop, which is 207, full subnet mask, and then inside. Let's take that out. In addition to granting access to just one IP address, I can grant access to an external IP address. For example, here's a public IP address with a 32-bit mask, but this time I will put outside on the end. Let's just take that out. I could also, if I so wished, grant access to every IP address inside the firewall simply by giving it all the zeros. Select inside. So let's have a look. Now, to work, the ASDM software itself has to be loaded inside the flash memory, and that's what that's telling me. The ASDM version that's on here is 647. Make sure it actually exists in flash, and there it is there. So we know that should work when we connect to it. So that's our ASDM enabled, and we've allowed traffic to it. To access the firewall via telnet on your Windows client from command line, the command is simply telnet, then the IP address of the firewall interface that's facing you. Log in with the telnet password, and then I'm simply going to enable mode, and that's as connected a command line. Okay, you can also use your PuTTY client to telnet into the firewall, except this time instead of selecting serial, select telnet and supply the IP address of the firewall, and then select open. And once again we're connected. Type in the telnet password. That's me going to enable mode. That's me in at command line. And we can, if we so wish, connect via hyperterminal. So fire up hyperterminal, give the connection a sensible name, change the connect using to TCP/IP WinSock, and supply the IP address of the firewall. Click OK. Once again, tap in the telnet password, and that's us in. Now, you can only actually access telnet if you have enabled telnet and you have allowed the IP address that you're trying to access from. So here I'm consoled in. Let's have a look and see what telnet commands are in the running config. Okay, at the minute all it's telling me is that telnet will time out after 5 minutes, which is slightly annoying because I prefer about 45 minutes, so let's knock that up. I don't want it timing out when you're working on it. 5 minutes is a little bit too short. Now, to actually access telnet, if I wanted to, I can put all the zeros in and select inside, and then I'd be able to telnet from all IP addresses inside the firewall. Let's take that back out again. I could also, if I so wished, set up access from just one IP address. 207 is my laptop, so if I give it a 32-bit mask and then select inside, only my laptop will be able to access the firewall via telnet. Let's just take that out. I could also, if I so wished, allow access for the entire subnet behind my firewall for telnet access. I'm just going to recall that allow everything telnet access for now and save the changes. So now if I do a show run telnet, it should tell me that all my inside IP addresses are allowed and my timeout set to 45 minutes. That's how I set up and configure your firewall for telnet access. Now to access via SSH, which is more secure, using PuTTY, select SSH, give it your IP address and select open. Now the first time you connect you'll have to accept the certificate because your traffic is encrypted and it uses the certificate to encrypt the traffic. You see there's a note on there, you can see I'm logging in with a username and password. That's because this firewall is running an operating system newer than version 8.4. That's me connected via PuTTY, so all my keystrokes and everything that I'm sending to the firewall is encrypted, as opposed to telnet where everything is sent in clear text. To allow SSH access it has to be set up the same as telnet, so if I just log in via my console cable, let's see what's set for SSH in the config. And again, all that's set is timeout of 5 minutes, so let's knock that up to 45 minutes. Now the method of allowing access for SSH management is exactly the same for telnet, except we use the keyword SSH instead of telnet. So all the zeros inside would allow all IP addresses inside the firewall SSH access. And again, if I so wished, I could grant access to an external IP address. This is generally how I access most of my clients' firewalls for remote administration. So let's just take that out. And I could, if I wanted to, allow SSH access just for one IP address on the inside network. For example, that's the IP address of my firewall. If I get the syntax right, the more eagle-eyed among you will notice that I missed the keyword inside off the end of the command. Or I can allow the entire subnet behind the firewall access, like so. So now we can see that my entire subnet is allowed access and the timeout is set for 45 minutes. Now as you saw earlier, accessing via SSH the traffic is encrypted, and to do that it needs a certificate. The certificate that it uses, it generates on two parameters: the host name of the firewall, for instance this one's called Pete Sasser, and the domain name. Now that's what the client sees when they connect, but by default you don't have a certificate, you have to manually generate one, and that's what I'm doing here. The command is crypto key generate RSA and hit return. It'll take a couple of minutes. This is what most people forget to do when they set up SSH and then they wonder why it doesn't work. It's because they haven't generated the certificate. Now, as you can see, if I just scroll up a little bit, this is version 8.43, and as I mentioned earlier, because it's after version 8.4, you need to set up AAA access for usernames and passwords to access the firewall via SSH. Which, if you think about it, makes sense. In telnet, the password is sent clear. You wouldn't want to use the same password for SSH, which is what Cisco have done for years. So the command to set it up is AAA authentication SSH console local. That's use a local database on the firewall for SSH access. I set up a username and a password. The syntax is simply username, then the username itself, password, then the password itself, privilege, then the privilege level. I'm going to set it to privilege level 15, which is the highest level. There are 16 levels, 0 to 15. I want to save my hard work with the right mem, and that's my firewall set up and configured for SSH access. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to come and visit us at www.petenetlive.com.